Wijngaarden is the director of the Mathematical Center at Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and he'll comment on the history of computing there.
Ladies and gentlemen, also I am very glad to be here and see so many old friends. Specifically, I'm glad that Harry Husky has arrived at last, and since I would badly miss him in the company. The last speaker has said that the wartime, which has had such a good effect on the early computer activity in the Anglo-Saxon countries specifically, had not that effect in France because it was occupied. Well, the same held for the Netherlands, and even worse. First of all, the Netherlands were really occupied. A lot of scientists were taken away. Moreover, our war lasted nearly a year longer than in France. And when we came out, then we were partly underwater. And so we were in a very, very sad situation. We really had nothing. The only thing we had was hope and enthusiasm. I was sent abroad for some other jobs, other fields which I was looking at, and I had some experience with computing and just on the desk computing for myself during the war in the fields I was working in. And when I came in England, I met all kinds of interesting people, Professor Hartree and Howlett, and I met Dr. Wilkes. And I went to the NPL and met several people there, and it was all very nice. That was in 1946, and actual computing wasn't done yet, except then for the differential analyzer in Manchester. When I came back, I went on with my own work, but in the meantime, the Netherlands was created by some Dutch mathematicians, the so-called Mathematical Center, a research center for mathematics independent of the universities. And the idea was to do pure and applied mathematics and get the thing running again, science of mathematics. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a computation department in which computation should be done, and of course numerical analysis should be done, and by the way also such an electronic computer should be constructed, and a couple of other little jobs. They were looking for someone who could do it, and they found a young man, that was me, who was enthusiastic enough and not knowing what difficulties he was facing, and so at last I took on the job and immediately went abroad again to England and to Princeton. And I met the same people again and some other ones. In the meantime, I saw what a tremendous amount of energy was going in the building of the computers at Teddington, at Cambridge, and of course also in Princeton and the other places in the US. When I came back at the end of the year, I was very enthusiastic. I had learned very little, only was very impressed by all the microseconds and even the nanoseconds, which were quite commonly talked about in Princeton. And then when I come home, I found that life was much harder than I thought, because here there was really nothing. We had no money, we had no space, we had no people, especially we had no skilled people. And so the first thing I could do is to hire two students in applied physics. They didn't know anything about electronics, and that didn't matter. They hadn't finished their studies either, but at least they had the same enthusiasm for the subject. I started to give a course on some of the ideas of electronic computers, for which all people who were interested in that field, who were to become interested in the field, attended. That was in the beginning of 1948, and then we tried to do something. We tried to make a computer, among other things, at the Mathematical Center, and as I told you, we had just nothing but our bare hands and some enthusiasm. It took a long time before really something got from the floor. We had some ideas that a relay machine would be easier than an electronic machine. everybody knows that it's silly, of course, but at least I could understand how a relay worked, and I had only a very vague idea what a valve was. And Donald Booth had some very enthusiastic idea about the arc, and so we started by making a relay machine. And this relay machine got bigger and bigger, and it started to contain some valves for amplification purposes. And at the end, in 1950, we had something which contained half relays and half valves, which the relays were done for the logical work and the valves for the dirty work. It was just all topsy-turvy. Anyhow, in 1950, the first computations were done, and very, very simple ones. Well, I saw from Professor Wilkes' lecture, again, the first table that was produced on the ACE, I'm so sorry, on the EDSEC was a table of squares, the very first. Well, my first table was a table of the reciprocal square. Yes. And I have had it bound and golden letters, and still stands in our library, only copy. Then we had to work on to get the machine really working, and 1952 it was in a state in which we could find a minister to dedicate the thing officially. It was still a very shady state. We had to learn also to find the correct demonstration programs, but I had a very good one. I had made a program on that computer which computed random numbers and printed them in nice columns. It took some talking to the minister to convince him that this was part of scientific calculation, but it has a fair chance to give. And actually, they look quite random, and they were actually. I have to say. Okay. As soon as the minister left the building, we started to think what we should do now. You see. And actually we felt very proud in 1952 because at last we had made something that worked. At that time we had overcome our biggest difficulties and the worst of our inferiority complexes. Then we got two nice people on the team. The first two people, I haven't mentioned the names, Loopstra and Scholten. And then Dr. Blau, who had worked with Aiken, came over for a couple of years to work with us. He's a Dutchman. And he brought with him a lot of technique and how to organize the building of a computer, all this kind of knowledge from Aiken's laboratory. And not even did he bring the technique, but he also brought the materials. He brought permalloy and all this kind of stuff, which we just hadn't. We had nothing. And it's really amazing what an amount of trouble we had to get ornery valves, which had roughly the properties that you might require for the job. And also I hired a little young theoretical physicist this time to be employed as a programmer. He developed himself quite well. His name is Djikstra. Well, in 1953, the next year, we had built in the same room a completely electronic computer, a drum computer. It had the same name. That was just, with an eye on the minister, you see, it just dedicated the first machine, and we wanted to have it look like that it was still the same machine, but it's completely different. It was an electronic machine, didn't contain any relays and so on. As soon as the machine was working, we started immediately calculating eigenfrequencies of airplane wings, because our Dutch Fokker airplane works were trying to get the airplane construction again from the floor and building the Fokker Friendship. And that, of course, involves a lot of computations. So we are just in time of having this first machine ready to make all those computations. I remember quite vividly how we did it. I came in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and started to work as an operator on the machine. And then I left at 5 o'clock in the morning. when an early student came and took the job over, I just could then get a first train to the place where I had my holidays, and I could take my wife out of bed and jump into the sea, and then had a breakfast with the children and slept till 4 o'clock, and then I could get with the train, and that's why I always came in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you see. But anyhow, the result was that we got the eigenfrequencies, and not only did we get the eigenfrequencies, but also the Fokker Airplane Works became so interested that they ordered a second machine, a copy for themselves, and within 1 year we made a copy, which was about twice as fast, much more reliable, and actually it worked for more than 10 years. The airplane, by the way, the Fokker Friendship, not only flew, but it is the best sold European commercial airplane in the world, you see, and still selling quite well. It's flying all around here in the United States even. Good. That was one part of the story. At the same time, the other two started to build a new machine, which we call the ARMAG. And the ARMAG was working 2 years later, in 1955. As soon as it worked, we immediately demolished the ARRA because we had no space. Some people asked, suggested to bring hardware into musea. Well, we offered always such a complete machine to a museum, and they always said they were gladly accept such a thing as long as we kept it up. Now, of course, the only reason why we wanted to get rid of the thing was because we could not keep it up. So that's why we had to demolish the things. Well, the ARMAG was much more interesting. It was again a factor 10 faster, and it contained 2 matrices of magnetic cores, and already a few transistors here and there just for experimental purposes. Also, the ARMAG has worked for 3 years consecutively till we got a new machine from the floor in 1958. The Mathematical Center brought out, or actually, well, the Mathematical Center had finished the construction of the X1 in the middle of June 1958. The X1 is a completely transistorized and completely ferrite core memory machine. It was the first that was brought on the market because in the meantime we had also made a commercial firm, Electrologica, which built those machines from now on in the CRS and sold them in Western Europe. We were very proud of this machine. Some of these machines are still working at the moment. This company, Electrologica, then went on and made a better and still much faster version, the X8, of which many are working at the moment. Electrologica was, from our point of view, a success in its originality of its constructions, which of course was due to the Mathematical Center, which was backing it. The only thing financially, it was not quite such a success. And I'll come back to that later on, because the Mathematical Center activity was not the only one in the Netherlands, because at the same time in 1947 there was a young student at Delft, his name is Van der Poel, who did optical calculations, and he was thinking of building also a relay machine, and actually constructed a relay machine for making optical calculations. The machine was very, very slow, and also the construction of the machine was very, very slow because it only was finished in 1954. And another name, by the way. Testudo, that means tortoise, and that was exactly the right idea of the speed of the whole operation. This man, Van der Poel, turned out to be a very energetic young man. One of my friends, Professor De Bruin, a well-known Dutch mathematician, had him as an assistant for some time and came complaining to me that he had now such a very clever assistant that within 1 hour he always had a headache listening to all the ideas that Van der Poel was giving to him. Good. Van der Poel then, after he'd finished his studies in 1951, he went to the Dutch post office and worked there with Kosten and started in construction of a machine after his own design. The first machine was called Ptera, but actually, which meant something, it's no relevance, of course, what it stood for, but the idea was to make a machine which has a very, very simple logical construction. And actually, even before Ptera worked, an even simpler machine worked, zero, it means really nothing, an experimental machine, and which was developed and later on the same machine into the real machine Ptera, which came ready in, I think, 1954. Now, that zero machine was only interesting from a theoretical point of view. It was much too slow to do actual useful computations. Even the Ptera was rather slow, and Van der Poel went on with his constructions and built a machine called the Zebra. The Zebra came ready in the beginning of 1958, and just before, 2 months before the X1 at the Mathematical Center came out. Now the X1, of course, the last of that line, and was much faster than the Zebra, but the Zebra was very interesting from many other points of view because of its logical structure. Also the PTT, the Dutch Post Office, didn't want to go in itself by constructing commercial these machines, and the Zebra was made commercially by Standard Telephone. It's sold as Stadtec Zebra, and many copies have been sold in Western Europe, in many universities, also the Netherlands, and many other places. I even once found one in Portugal, on the beach. Yeah, but there was a laboratory over it, you see. I'll come back to that. And actually, this was the end of all the constructions for the Dutch Post Office. Then there was a third activity going on in 1951. Philips, that's a bulb factory in the Netherlands. Philips thought that they ought to look into the subject too, and they started very, very slowly. And in 1954, when we had already a couple of machines behind us, they started making a very small machine, Peter, and which came ready in after 2 years or so. And then they made a next machine which came ready in end of 1959, called the Pascal, which was compared with the other Dutch machines, a very fast machine. They used very modern techniques, and of course they had behind them all the power of a big world organization, and they had everything they wanted. They made their own transistors and so on and so forth. But the machine was not interested from any point of view whatsoever. The only interesting point of view, it was owned by a big organization, and the organization had decided to go into the computer industry. So they built Philips computer industry, and now I come back to my Electrologica problem. After some time, Electrologica was not such a financial success. Philips computer industry bought Electrologica and combined it into a new firm, Philips Electrologica. Philips Electrologica then gave up the construction of the X8, a machine there for the line that was created by the Mathematical Center. And within a couple of years, they had to go out of the market of big machines, as you may have heard last years. The fact was namely that Philips made machines, but the machines were extremely similar as the IBM 360, and since they had no advantages whatsoever about the IBM 360, of course they didn't sell them. So that is, Philips, by the way, goes on in many computers, but that's for the last years, and here ends my historical part. So there are two interesting, let's say, from several points, interesting undertakings in the Netherlands. That is, the machines which are constructed, the line which was constructed at the Mathematical Center, the line which was constructed at the post office by Van der Poel, and both lines have finished, so they are really history, so I can talk about it. Okay then. Well, if you ask, are there any particular things any peculiar things in the construction techniques of the machine? No, not any longer. Apart, I said, we were very fast in having transistorized computer, but from other points of view, they are of not particular technical interest. But from other points of view, they are interesting, I think, or they were interesting, whatever you want to call it, and that's namely the spirit behind them. The spirit behind them was the spirit of mathematical elegance, and up to a certain extent, both in Amsterdam and in The Hague. The Hague, that is the Dutch post office. And the government, by the way, but that has nothing to do with it. And, the idea is, as soon as we started in Amsterdam by making our first machine, and even in our poorest state, we tried not to be sloppy. For instance, we never have had input or output in octal or sexagesimal scale. And our output, even of our most primitive machine, was correct. I mean, that said, we did not print non-significant zeros if we did not want to print non-significant zeros and such things. And we rounded our results correctly. And there are even machines now in the world which do not round correctly their results, as you may know, you see. Then moreover, the first code, which was our first ARRA machine, the very first one, was taken over from actually the Van Neumann code and the code of Wilk's machine. But we already tried to change it and make something more functional in such a sense that certain bits in the code stood for some function. Let's say 1 for plus and 1 for minus, or 1 for plus or minus, or 1 for the left register or the right-hand side register, such like things. And in the course of the different computers which you have built in Amsterdam, the code became more and more functional. That means more and more, let's say in the X1, for instance, you will find that the instructions are grouped and for instance, one group of instructions which have to do with addition or loading, subtraction, and this kind of stuff. They have to do with there are 3 registers, 2 registers and an index register. Two bits are reserved for that purpose. Moreover, you can load into such a register, you can add into such a register, or you can go from that register to the store. And there is one bit which says whether you go from the store to the register or from the register to the store. There is one bit which says whether it goes with clearing or without clearing. The one bit that says additive or negative, and such things. There's nothing peculiar, all those things are known, but I still look with a lot of dismay at the codes of many of the machines which are usually, or are used nowadays, in which just have a big list of instructions which have no obvious structure. Now, actually, the ideas from the pool were even much more rigorous, and therefore I think much more interesting, and I want to tell you something about them. There don't say that I'm not trying to defend anything. Of course, I'm a historian. I'm just talking about the work which was done by the people in Amsterdam, which were done by people in The Hague, and they were all, well, we were all young people, so to say. I'm completely neutral. And perhaps in Amsterdam we had much more success with our machines. We just kept on somewhat longer, and you know the best way to have success is to keep on going and never give up. But I think that the ideas behind the machines that were constructed by Van der Poel were much more interesting and will be of more value for the future in the end. The idea of I'll take only the Zebra machine by Van der Poel. The idea is this, that you have, and I'll make a sketch now. I don't like these specks of dust. And the idea of the Zebras, for instance, there is a thing called arithmetic organ, and there is a control organ, and there is a short store, and there is a big store, drum store. Well, actually in the machine of Van der Poel, this is, there are 2 to the power 13 addresses on the drum, 2 to the power 13 words on the drum, yes, of 33 bits, by the way, and there are 2 to the power 5 immediately available addresses, which actually were in the first versions regenerative tracks on that same drum, but of no relevance whatsoever. Now, these two, by the way, you see, I need to specify. I'll come back to that. Now, there is a connection between the arithmetic organ and the short star, but there's also a connection between the arithmetic organ and the drum star. There's one between the control and the drum star, and between the short star and the drum star. And now at each instruction, you must specify to which of the two the short star is connected and to which of the two the drum star is connected. And you see they may be connected to both things. Moreover, you must specify whether you go in one direction or in the other direction. That must be specified for both the things. The idea now by Van der Poel is namely that it's such a pity in the usual construction of machines, you see two things happening. An instruction is selected from the store, and then this instruction is executed. Then the selection is fetched from the store, and then it's executed. Now, when you are fetching an instruction from the store, during that time, the execution organ is doing nothing. See, and that's a pity of the time. You could do, in the meantime, that thing is standing idle. And the idea by Van der Poel is that you should always keep as busy as possible. Now, there are a number of operations, say you fetching, making this connection or this or this or this, that I need a couple of bits for that. Then the direction which you go, you need a couple of bits for that. Then perhaps you want to invert something, you need a bit for that, and some other bits of that kind. And now, in Word in this Zebra machine has 33 bits. And we need only 18 for this, so we have 15 left. We have 15 left, so we have 15 functional bits left. And the idea is to have those 15 functional bits at your disposal, all of them orthogonally. Now, some people like that, some people don't like it. It's like driving a car with not having just a gearbox, but having all the gears loose in your hands and combining them whilst driving, you see. It's a kind of sport, and some people like that kind of sport. Now, to see how it works, I'll give you, I'm not going to teach you, I just will write down a little piece of a program. And the program is, will have the following task. It will be a subroutine, and the task is to transport a number of those short store registers into some drum store registers. Or to bring those drum store registers into the short store registers. Yeah, sure, of course it is a subroutine, therefore it is a procedure, and just by the way of calling the procedure, it should have that effect, you see? Now, I'm not going to tell you all of this, and I'm not going to give the whole example because it takes too long time, but to give an idea of how this goes. Now, first of all, I must tell you, there are actually somewhere, there is not only, the arithmetic register has an A and a B register, and this control piece has only also a C and a D register. Then the short store here, well, I come back to it. Let me, I immediately go and write down a program. First of all, there is a bit which says whether the drum store is used for the arithmetic organ or for the control organ. You see, when the bit is 1, then I made this connection. With the bit 0, this connection is made. Now, in the instruction code, it's assembly code, the programmer writes it, he only writes, all those bits have a name, A, B, C, D, E, and so on. And you only write the bit if it is a 1, and you do not write it, just leave it out when it is a 0. But they might all be 0, and that's a nuisance because and there might be nothing at all because addresses may also disappear. And therefore, to keep at least one bit visible, when the when the A is 0, the A bit, that means that this connection is made for the control. Then we'll write a capital X, you see. And now suppose for some reason or another, there is something in A, something in B, some contents in C, and let's suppose there be X followed by some address, let's say 200. I just write something, and something in D is of no relevance. Now, suppose the machine is in this state. Now what will happen? Well, I must know what happens with this instruction X200, and you must look up in the book what happens. Now, first of all, the first effect will have that this X200 goes into D, but it becomes the X202, 2 are added. And moreover, this thing says, go and look in address 200 in my program, and look what stands there, and pick it up and put it in here. That's all. And there may be all other kind of things, but we'll skip them for the moment. Now I'll find here and look at what stands here. It's a bit of a nuisance. You're getting colorblind here, you see, because I see all those colors in. Okay. 200 I put here, 200. Let that be the instruction NC4. What does this mean? Now, N actually is an abbreviation for X followed by the next address. So this is actually X201, but it occurs so often that is an abbreviation of the code. Actually, that is not so systematic, but even Van der Poel has to give in to human laziness. So actually, this thing is taken over in here, so I get X201C4. Okay, now this instruction is done. You see that fetching an instruction is also an instruction. Instruction, nothing happens automatically. Now this instruction is now obeyed. Now I must look what happens. Oh, I'm missing my X, I'm so sorry. Now this is an X instruction again, so first of all, this thing will be copied in here, X203 C4, and this is obvious no relevance. The X happens here to act more or less like a jump. You see, this set, the formal set of control is of no relevance. And now what is this C4? Now the 4 is a short address. There's an address in this store, and the contents of address 4 goes cleared into the accumulator A. So this accumulator A will be cleared, and the contents of 4 goes in here. You say, well, how do you know? Well, always goes something in A or B. And when I do not specify specifically that it must go in B, then it goes into A. Okay, fine. But you might ask, why not here? Well, it also happened here actually. You see, the short address was here missing. That means it was 0. There was not a specific mentioning B that it ought to go in B, adding in B. Therefore, a 0 went, the contents of address 0 was added into the contents of A. But the contents of address 0, the small 0 that is actually constant 0. This register isn't there at all, you see, because those short registers, only a couple of them really exist. And so actually nothing happened, there was just a 0 missing. So it's simpler than it looks at the first sight. But only slightly. Now, I find out the next instruction says here, oh, I see. The next instruction was here X101KE4BC. This one takes up the instruction of X201 and puts it in here. Now, what gets in here? It gets X100 KE 4BC. Well, actually, of course, the bits which correspond to that pattern. You understand? Oh, that's it. And now this instruction is obeyed, and this takes the contents of address 100 and put it in here in the control. Now in 100 actually, that's where my subroutine starts. Yes, thank you. This is where the subroutine starts. And so this is actually a subroutine jump. And here in address 4 is the return instruction, or at least the relevant information kept. Well, now, I'll not go on with this program for 2 reasons. The first reason that I have no time. The second reason is that you could all find it in one of the books by Van der Poel, so you can read this example exactly. Well, you have to do a lot of homework because in Van der Poel's example you only get this half with some comment, but you have to work it all out yourself. You act as a computer. Okay, now the idea is that if you go on, then sometime you jump back and the program comes back here at address 202 goes on. But if you now, instead of those 2 calling instructions, put some other calling instruction, and I only will write it down if I had at some address, let's say at 200, the X100 KE15 BCQ, then I also would call in this thing, and then that same subroutine will not transport from the short store to the drumster, from the drumster to the shotster, and come back, you see? Now, President Lincoln said, people who like this sort of thing will find this the sort of thing they like. And the real programmers, I mean the programmers which have it built in, you know, they like this side of thing. All those bright boys, which you know from the lecture room, the real bright boys, you see, they pick it up, and a number of time they know all those things, they find tricks and so on and so forth. There are a lot of people, of course, who do not like it that much, and therefore, for those people, there was a simple code designed in which the usual users of the machine can express themselves and have all things available, floating point routines and God knows and so on and so forth, and have just such a very nice code available. This code, this actually an interpretive code, an interpreted code, and the quality of the whole design, I think, is best given by the fact that the interpreted code run only 5 times slower than the direct machine code. I think this is quite an achievement, because in Amsterdam we lost at least a factor between 10 and 20 in interpreting, if you were interpreting well, of course. Okay. Another example, for instance, the machine does not contain a multiplier. The multiplication goes by means of subroutine, like this, and the subroutine is such that even if the machine had a multiplier with the same kind of circuitry, it would not have run faster than with the subroutine. Well, this was an idea of the work by Van der Poel and the other ones, and this is the end of my story. Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Brian Randall.
Randall, since you mentioned the Zebra and this form of programming, I wonder if you might like to just mention a little bit about the work of Van der Mey, which I think is always worthy of mention.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Let me then first, before I do that, say these two groups in Amsterdam and The Hague, which had a violent competition, of course, during all those years, and which was very fruitful, all this competition, at the end all came together, because when they had not to build any computers anymore, they turned to software, and everybody came into the ALGOL field. And many people, like Van der Poel and Djikstra, of course, with his ALGOL-68 compiler, and they all went into the ALGOL field in development there, and some of them even went further on and took the consequences of orthogonality and went into the ALGOL-68 field with some success. Now, in Holland, there is a doctor in mathematics who is blind and deaf. His name is Van der Mey. And Van der Mey wanted to do something, and I could not think of anything better for him than topology, but Van der Poel was much cleverer and thought he might become a programmer, although he was a pure mathematician. Not only became he a programmer, he wrote an ALGOL-68 compiler for the Zebra, all on his own, of course. His only connection with the world are special post office telex lines, which offers Van der Poel, a special gadget so that he can feel with his fingers what you are saying. But he also lectured. For instance, at the Mathematical Centrum, he once lectured for all our specialists, all lecture room full, and the best impression I can give, I'm a big admirer of the man. He's standing just in the middle of the room. He talks straight ahead. He can't see you, you know. He can't hear you. He just talks for 1.5 hours. Van der Poel running forwards and backwards on that blackboard to write down what he would have written down if he could write. So. And it's beyond, at least beyond my conception, that someone can do that. Is that the answer to your question?
I would like to add, Edsger W. Djikstra, Burroughs Corporation. I would like to add one other particular detail of that most impressive performance. It was, of course, very tiring for the audience because Van der Mey had such a trained memory that he expected that what he had said once, you knew, of course.
Yes.
Therefore, that was one of the reasons why Van der Poel was rushing around the blackboard. The other thing was the most impressive way in which Van der Poel had realized and had shared the problem of the communication. The way in which Van der Poel communicated with him was by pointing out letters on his hand, and then Van der Mey would immediately guess the word, and as soon as he guessed right, then Van der Poel would start pointing to the next word, so as to speed up. And at a certain moment, he made a joke. Van der Mey, while lecturing, made a joke, and Van der Poel rushed away from the blackboard and fingered on his hand, "The audience is laughing."
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much.
Okay.